Jamal Carter walked confidently through the gleaming halls of Westbridge Academy, a school known for its high academic standards and wealthy student body. The polished marble floors and towering bookshelves in the library made it clear that this was a place of privilege, a school where success was expected. Jamal, one of the few black students in his grade, had earned his place through sheer intelligence and determination. He was well liked by his peers, a standout in both academics and extracurriculars, and had his sights set on an Ivy League future. But there was one obstacle in his way: Mr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson had been a history teacher at Westbridge for over 20 years. He was known for his strict grading, outdated teaching style, and subtle favoritism towards certain students. Though never openly racist, his actions spoke louder than words. He frequently dismissed black students' comments in class, often favoring white students' perspectives. He would ignore Jamal when he raised his hand, yet enthusiastically engage with other students who gave the same answers. At first, Jamal didn't think much of it. He believed that if he worked hard enough, his talent would shine through. He spent hours on his assignments, making sure every paper was well-researched and thoroughly written. He double-checked his sources, ensured his arguments were airtight, and even consulted his English teacher to refine his writing. But no matter how hard he worked, the grades told a different story. Every assignment returned from Mr. Peterson was marked with the same discouraging red ink: C sus, B, or on one occasion, a crushing D. Yet when he compared his work with his classmates, he noticed something disturbing. Students who had put in half the effort, students who had glaring errors in their arguments, were walking away with A's. Confused, Jamal decided to approach Mr. Peterson after class. "Excuse me, Mr. Peterson, could we talk about my grade on the last essay?" he asked politely. Mr. Peterson barely looked up from his desk. "What about it?" "I just wanted some feedback. I spent a lot of time making sure my arguments were clear, and I checked my sources carefully. Could you tell me where I went wrong?" The teacher sighed, finally glancing up. "Jamal, your work just isn't at the level I expect in this class. Your ideas, they lack depth." Jamal's stomach tightened. "But I followed the rubric exactly, and I even compared my work with some of my classmates who got higher grades. I don't see much difference." Mr. Peterson leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Maybe history just isn't your strongest subject. Not everyone is cut out for analytical thinking, Jamal. You should focus on something that plays more to your strengths." The words hit Jamal like a slap. He knew exactly what Mr. Peterson was implying. He wasn't being told that he needed to improve. He was being told that he didn't belong. Fuming, Jamal walked out of the classroom, gripping his backpack strap so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had worked too hard, fought too many battles to be dismissed like this. He knew his grades mattered for college applications, and he refused to let one prejudiced teacher stand in the way of his future. As he headed home, his frustration simmered into determination. He knew he needed to take action. If Mr. Peterson thought he could get away with this, he was about to learn that Jamal wasn't just any student. He was the son of Dr. Vanessa Carter, head of the Westbridge Academy School Board, and she wasn't going to let this slide. Jamal sat in the school library, flipping through his latest graded paper, his frustration building. A red C was scrawled at the top, and Mr. Peterson's comments were vague at best. "Weak analysis," one note read. "Lacks originality," said another, but Jamal had gone the extra mile on this assignment, analyzing primary sources, drawing unique conclusions, and ensuring his writing was polished. He glanced across the table at his classmate, Ethan, a white student who had casually admitted to writing his paper the night before it was due. Ethan's grade? An A. At first, Jamal thought maybe he was just imagining things. Maybe he had missed something. But then, after speaking with some of his black classmates, a pattern started to emerge. "I've never gotten higher than a B in his class, no matter what I do," one student, Marcus, admitted. "Yeah," added another, Sophia. "I wrote the same argument as a white girl in our class, and she got an A while I got a B. It doesn't even make sense." The more stories Jamal heard, the clearer it became. Mr. Peterson wasn't grading fairly. The realization hit hard, but Jamal's mother, Dr. Vanessa Carter, encouraged him to keep pushing forward. "Don't let one biased teacher stop you," she told him one evening at dinner. "You're brilliant, Jamal. Keep doing your best work, and the truth will come out." But Jamal was tired of playing fair in a game that was rigged against him. Determined to prove his abilities beyond question, Jamal poured his heart into his next research paper. The assignment was to analyze an underrepresented historical event, and Jamal chose the Tulsa Race Massacre, an event he knew wasn't covered much in school curricula. He spent weeks researching, cross-referencing sources, and carefully crafting his argument. His English teacher even looked it over and said it was one of the best papers she'd seen. Confident in his work, Jamal submitted it, hoping that this time his effort would be undeniable. But when Mr. Peterson returned the graded papers, Jamal felt his stomach drop. A D. Jamal's hands shook as he flipped through the pages, expecting detailed feedback. Instead, all he saw were dismissive comments. Unclear argument. Lacks proper structure. And the worst. Not up to standards. Furious, Jamal stayed after class. "Mr. Peterson, I need to talk to you about my paper." Mr. Peterson barely glanced at him. "Make it quick, Carter." "I spent weeks on this," Jamal said, struggling to keep his voice even. "I had another teacher review it and she said it was excellent. How did I get a D?" Mr. Peterson sighed as if he were dealing with a stubborn child. "Jamal, some students are naturally better at this kind of work. Maybe history just isn't your subject." Jamal clenched his fists. "That's not true, and you know it." The teacher chuckled. "I'm just saying, maybe you should focus on things more suited to your strengths." There it was, the quiet racism that had been lingering beneath the surface all along. Jamal stormed out, his anger now mixed with something stronger, determination. That night, Jamal told his mother everything. He laid out his graded papers, his classmates' experiences, and finally, Mr. Peterson's condescending words. Dr. Carter's face remained calm, but her eyes burned with a quiet fury. "He really said that to you?" "Yes." She nodded, then stood up and grabbed her phone. "All right then. It's time for Mr. Peterson to learn a lesson of his own." Jamal watched as his mother dialed a number, her voice sharp and authoritative. He had always known she worked in education, but he had never needed to invoke her position before. Now, for the first time, he fully understood the power she held. She wasn't just any educator. She was the head of the school board, and Mr. Peterson had no idea what was coming. The Westbridge Academy school board meetings were usually quiet affairs, attended mostly by administrators and a few concerned parents. But tonight, the room buzzed with anticipation. News of the meeting had spread through the school, and several students, including Jamal's friends, had come to witness what was about to unfold. At the head of the long conference table sat Dr. Vanessa Carter, poised and composed, her presence commanding the attention of the room. Seated across from her, looking increasingly uncomfortable, was Mr. Peterson. "Tonight, we are here to address a serious concern regarding the fairness of grading practices in Mr. Peterson's history classes," Dr. Carter announced. Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. Jamal sat in the audience, his heart pounding. He had never seen his mother in full professional mode like this. "As head of the school board, I requested a review of Mr. Peterson's grading records," she continued. "What we found was deeply troubling." A board member passed out printed reports while another turned on a projector, displaying a spreadsheet filled with names, grades, and racial demographics. A clear pattern emerged. Black students consistently received lower grades than their white counterparts, even when their work was of equal or superior quality. Gasps echoed through the room, whispers spread among the students and parents present. Dr. Carter turned to Mr. Peterson. "Would you care to explain this?" The teacher cleared his throat, forcing a smug smile. With all due respect, Dr. Carter, I grade based on merit. I hold my students to high standards regardless of their background. Dr. Carter didn't flinch. High standards? She pointed at the spreadsheet. Then why do students with nearly identical answers receive drastically different grades? Why do black students in your class struggle to achieve A's while white students with weaker arguments excel? Mr. Peterson chuckled nervously. Well, I can't be expected to remember every single assignment. Maybe the students who performed better simply deserved those grades. A hand shot up in the audience. It was Sophia, one of Jamal's classmates. That's not true. I wrote the same argument as my white friend, and she got an A while I got a B. Another student, Marcus, stood. I stopped taking history seriously because I knew I wouldn't get higher than a B, no matter how hard I worked. More students murmured in agreement. The room fell silent. The evidence was overwhelming. Beads of sweat formed on Mr. Peterson's forehead. He shifted in his seat, his earlier confidence fading fast. But the moment that truly broke him was when Dr. Carter calmly folded her hands on the table and said, "Oh, I should also mention, I am Jamal Carter's mother." The color drained from Mr. Peterson's face. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Dr. Carter let the silence linger before continuing. You told my son that history wasn't his strong suit, that analytical thinking wasn't for him. But let me be clear. Jamal has one of the sharpest minds in this school, and your actions, Mr. Peterson, were not about academic standards. They were about bias, about power, and about keeping bright black students from reaching their full potential. Jamal had never been more proud of his mother. She continued, her voice steady. Education is meant to uplift, not exclude. When a teacher like you abuses his authority to discriminate against students, it is our duty to correct that injustice. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Mr. Peterson swallowed hard. I was just... Dr. Carter held up a hand. You've said enough. A board member spoke up. Dr. Carter, based on this evidence, I propose an immediate suspension of Mr. Peterson pending further investigation. The motion passed unanimously. Jamal watched as Mr. Peterson, once so smug, now sat slumped in his chair, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. For the first time, the teacher who had tried to hold him back was the one being held accountable. The morning after the school board meeting, the entire school was buzzing with the news. Mr. Peterson had been suspended. Students whispered in the hallways, some in shock, others in relief. The once feared history teacher, who had for years controlled his classroom with an iron grip, had been brought down by his own actions. For Jamal, the victory felt surreal. Just a few weeks ago, he had felt powerless, like his hard work would never be recognized. Now, the entire school was talking about his fight for justice and how he won. That afternoon, an official statement was sent out to students and parents. Following a thorough review of grading discrepancies in Mr. Peterson's history classes, Westbridge Academy has placed him on indefinite suspension pending further investigation. The school is committed to ensuring fair and unbiased academic evaluation for all students. By the end of the month, the school board reached its decision. Mr. Peterson was officially fired. For years, he had hidden his discrimination behind rigorous standards and academic expectations. But when forced to face the evidence, he had no defense. His tenure, his reputation, his position of power, all gone. In the weeks that followed, Westbridge Academy underwent major changes. Under Dr. Carter's leadership, the school implemented mandatory bias training for all teachers. The training focused on recognizing implicit bias, ensuring fair grading practices, and fostering an inclusive classroom environment. It wasn't just about punishing one teacher. It was about fixing a broken system. Some teachers grumbled at first, but most recognized that this was long overdue. Many students, especially those from marginalized backgrounds, had long felt that certain teachers, Mr. Peterson included, favored some students over others. The training forced educators to confront uncomfortable truths about how racism, even when unspoken, impacts students' futures. One afternoon, Jamal was walking through the halls when Ms. Bennett, his English teacher, stopped him. "I just want to say," she said, smiling, "what you did took a lot of courage. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for every student who's ever been treated unfairly. I'm really proud of you." Jamal nodded. Feeling a warmth spread through him. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly seen. A week after Mr. Peterson's firing, Jamal was called to the principal's office. Sitting behind the desk was Principal Lawson, a strict but fair administrator. Dr. Carter was also present, but this time she wasn't here as his mother. She was here as the school board chair. "Jamal," Principal Lawson began. "After reviewing Mr. Peterson's grading history, we found that you and several other students were unfairly marked down. Effective immediately, we are adjusting your grades to reflect your actual performance." Jamal exhaled sharply, relief washing over him. His C's and D's were replaced with the A's he had rightfully earned. His GPA, which had been unfairly dragged down, was restored. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. Dr. Carter turned to him with a proud smile. "You earned this, son. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." As Jamal walked out of the office, he felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He had fought back. He had won. And now he could move forward, knowing that his future was truly his own. For the first time in months, Jamal Carter felt truly at peace. The injustice he had faced wasn't just about grades, it was about his worth, his future, and the silent barriers that tried to hold him back. But now he had proof that standing up for himself made a difference. His grades had been restored, his hard work recognized, and a toxic teacher had been removed from a position of power. But Jamal knew this wasn't just about him. Sitting in the library one afternoon, he overheard a group of younger black students talking in hushed voices. "Man, I always thought Mr. Peterson was unfair," one of them said. "But I never thought anything would change." "Yeah," another added. "It's like no one listens when we talk about this stuff." Jamal had been in their shoes before. He knew the feeling of being dismissed, ignored, and underestimated, but now he was in a position to change that. That night, he drafted a plan for an academic mentorship program designed specifically for Black students at Westbridge Academy. The goal? To provide guidance, tutoring, and a support system so that no student would feel powerless again. When he presented the idea to his mother, Dr. Carter beamed with pride. "This is exactly what we need," she said. "If students feel empowered, they won't just survive in spaces like this, they'll thrive." Within a month, the Westbridge Black Scholars Program was officially launched, with Jamal as its first student leader. The program paired younger students with upperclassmen mentors, hosted workshops on academic excellence, and created a safe space where students could share their experiences and learn how to advocate for themselves. The impact was immediate. Students who once stayed silent about unfair treatment began speaking up. Teachers, now aware that their actions were being watched, became more mindful in their grading and classroom interactions, and for the first time, Black students at Westbridge Academy felt like they truly belonged. Dr. Vanessa Carter had always been a fighter for educational equity, but her son's experience made the battle personal. She took her role as head of the school board to the next level, pushing for policies that ensured teachers were held accountable for their grading and classroom behavior. Mandatory bias training became a permanent part of faculty development. A new reporting system was created, allowing students to safely report discrimination without fear of retaliation. Diverse hiring initiatives were launched, ensuring that more teachers of color were placed in leadership positions. Dr. Carter knew change wouldn't happen overnight, but if Westbridge Academy could evolve, then so could the entire school district. While Jamal and his mother worked to build a better future, Mr. Peterson was forced to face the consequences of his actions. Once a respected veteran teacher, He had lost everything: his job, his reputation, and his influence. No other school in the district wanted to hire him. Word had spread about his actions, and in an era where schools were being held accountable for bias, his brand of teaching had no place. At one point, a local news article covered the scandal, referring to him as a disgraced educator who failed to adapt to changing times. Jamal didn't need revenge. Seeing Mr. Peterson leave Westbridge in disgrace was enough. The man who had once wielded power over students' futures had learned the hard way that racism had consequences. One afternoon, Jamal sat on the steps of the school, watching younger students walk by. Students who, thanks to the mentorship program, would never have to go through what he did. He had come into this school year believing that hard work alone would be enough to succeed. But now he understood something even greater. Hard work must be paired with the courage to challenge injustice. As he glanced at his phone, a college acceptance email flashed across the screen. He had done it. His future was secure, not because of luck, but because he refused to let anyone take it from him. Jamal smiled. This was just the beginning. Jamal had learned his lesson, and so had everyone else.